In the foyer, we'd like for you to come on in. We're going to begin here in just shortly. We want to welcome you today to the first session of our 12-question seminar. Someone might ask, where did all these questions come from? These questions have come from 12questions.org that was posted on the website, and people in our community submitted these questions. And of that number, there were about 75 questions submitted. And of those questions, we took the ones that kind of filtered to the top and were the most often asked questions. And today, we're thrilled that you're here. We're going to be on YouTube today, so there might be some watching us this morning. And we're thankful that you are tuned in and you're going to watch this Bible class hour at 9 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock, there'll be another section with 2 more questions, and then this afternoon at 5, there'll be 2 additional questions answered today. So we are grateful for your presence today. I'm going to give a more formal introduction of our speaker at the 10 o'clock hour, but we do want to begin the session this morning with the first of 2 questions. Dr. Ralph Gilmore from Henderson, Tennessee, Freed-Hardeman University is our guest speaker this morning. And Ralph, if you'd make your way to the front, we're going to pose this question this morning that some have asked. And the first question is, if God loves everyone, why do Christians reject those who identify as LGBTQ? This is a very important topic today on the minds of many people. So welcome, Brother Ralph Gilmore, to the podium. Ralph, welcome today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
That was pretty sorry. Let's try that again. Good morning. That's much better. Steve and I were friends until he sent me all these questions. Turn me down just a little bit, please. Okay, and I'm glad to be here. Nobody is an expert. An X is a has-been, and a spurt comes out under pressure. So an expert is a has-been who comes out under pressure. An expert is also known as somebody who's more than 100 miles away from home. And that does qualify because we tried to come Friday night, and then we got over Little Rock, and we were in a holding pattern there because your weather was so bad in the Dallas area that they closed the airport. So we had to turn back, go back to Memphis, and then we came back yesterday. And we got here last night. Here's my wife, Joyce, right there on the front, and we're glad to have her. We've been married for 47 years. 45 of them are happy. Those first 2 are a little bit rough. But glad that she is here. We look forward to meeting you and to being with you today. Okay, so I only have about 20 minutes per question, and this question, every question asked deserves more time than that. Where did I put my clicker? Okay, I put it in my pocket. Alrighty, so let's see if we can get the technology going. Sometimes known as LGBT, sometimes known as LGBTQ, but it has to do with those who are of same-sex attraction and variations thereof. So that's the question for today. I've done several of these around the country, Fresno, California, and Idaho, and Kentucky, and Tennessee. This question always comes to the top. One reason is because we're in a time where, obviously, people want to express their tolerance toward one another, and so do I. And they want to talk about the fact that we can get together, and so do I. But there are 2 things that you had to consider here. Number one is compassion, and the other is no compromise. So whenever we think about these 2 ideas today, I want to come across in a very loving way, in a very caring way, yet we need to look at some things pretty seriously here because the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that they would be legal on June the 26th, 2015. By the way, if you're online, we are certainly glad that you have come and it gave me an excuse to take my tie off. Okay, let's see, what else do we see? This discussion is not about homosexual orientation. I'm not going to say that it's wrong to be same-sex attracted. There are some people who are same-sex attracted who wish they weren't. There are some people who are same-sex attracted and they don't know why. That's going to be the case. So same-sex attraction is different from the idea that you are practicing with a gay partner. So if you're practicing sex with a gay partner, that's different from the fact that you are same-sex attracted. So I will often talk about same-sex attraction as opposed to homosexuality. Homosexuality itself is not a sin unless, of course, one practices homosexual acts. So, 4 parts of the lesson. Man, I I got to do this fast, Steve. Okay, are gay marriages contrary to God's will? Is there a gay gene? Can one be gay and be a Christian? And how do we try to minister to those who are gay in the Waxahachie area? For 3 weeks, I've been practicing on Waxahachie. I have no idea if that sounds right, but that's what I've been saying to myself. And I still can't spell it. All right, but nonetheless, I am here. Just take out the T. I know. All right, and so number one, then let's see if we can go forward. Are gay marriages contrary to God's will? Well, there's two important attitudes in our approach here. We want to be compassionate, but of course, you know, there's some things that we just can't do. We can't change what the Bible says about it. What did Jesus say? Well, sometimes people say about Jesus, he never really talked about those who are homosexuals or gays, and therefore it's okay. Be careful with that argument, however. Jesus never talked about a lot of things. He never talked about women's roles in the church, for instance. He never talked about whether or not it's okay for women to preach. He didn't talk about a lot of things. So just because Jesus doesn't talk about it means that you ought to be instead looking at what Jesus did talk about. So what Jesus did talk about is that he talked about, every time he spoke of sexual relationships, is in heterosexual terms. I mean, every time. Therefore, this should carry more weight if you kind of look and see what Jesus said. In Matthew chapter 19, we see that God made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh, where what therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. All right, so 1 Corinthians 6, 16, and 17, I'm going to go through some quick passages here. Or do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says the two shall become one flesh, as Jesus talked about one flesh in Matthew chapter 19. It does not seem that God recognizes homosexual marriages because there's nothing about it in the Bible, and instead he speaks of it always in heterosexual terms. Males and females are physically suited to heterosexual marriage, and it is the case that in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, it does talk a lot about things that are contrary to nature, which is in Greek paraphusin. Phusin is the word from which we get our word physician. Phusin. Okay, all right, so according to nature, the passage Paul says is against nature. Those that know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. That's from the Old Testament and not from the New Testament, by the way. They not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. So the latter end for them is that the consequences is worse than the beginning when they first got started. Well, some would say, well, there's pederasty. Man, I'm going to have to, I don't know how old the people are who are in here. I'm going to assume that the younger ones are in class. Pederasty is like a Roman noble taking, let's say, a prepubescent 10, 11, 12-year-old boy and then training him in the ways of sex. And it was viewed to be a status symbol in ancient Rome, and it even has a Greek word, pederastes, and it means a pederast, or one who does this. So some who say, well, Romans 1 is only talking about this. The problem with Romans 1 talking about this is the fact that this is mutual attraction here. And if you have mutual attraction with a 10-year-old boy, it would seem to me that that would violate this passage because he hadn't even gone through puberty yet. So if that's the situation, pederasty is not addressed in Romans 1. Besides that, the Greek word did exist, and if Paul wanted to talk about pederasty, he could talk about pederasty because there's the Greek word for it. Now, also Paul uses wording for males, arsenes, which is the word, okay, the word for male is aner, and the word for female is gune. So since he uses the specific word for males here, he's talking about males. He's not just talking about people, he's talking about males. And we should remember that Paul also talks about lesbian and homosexual relationships whenever he talks about in the same way, likewise, etc. Now, according to one guy, and I try to stay up to date on this, July the 23rd, 2018, he is saying, he's a Jewish rabbi, and he's saying that they never were condemned in the Old Testament. I would refer you to albertmoeller.com. He is a scholar, and he would talk to you about the fact that this is the conclusion he reaches in the Old Testament. Every single text in the Bible that speaks of same-sex sexual desire and same-sex sexual behaviors condemns them. Okay, so what are the, but it is not the worst of all possible sins. We are taking out of context because we're thinking, aha, well, that's going to bring down America. No, America's got plenty of other things to bring it down. You know, it is true that this is a bad sin, but I want you to notice that there are 20 sins mentioned in Romans 1, and why do we focus on this one? Why do we do that? There they are listed for you. I'm not going to go through all of them, but according to looking in verses 18 through 32, I tried to be very accurate in listing every sin that is mentioned there, so don't consider being gay to be the highest of all sins. It is not true. Matter of fact, being gay itself is not a sin per se until you choose to have a gay partner. And then at that point, it becomes wrong, but according to the passage here, there's a lot of sins that can condemn us all. Therefore, we have to be careful about taking it out of context. Now, God had intentions for sexuality in Genesis 1 and 2. You know about that. He created man in his own image, and woman also is in the image of God. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. According to the words for homosexual in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, some say that the word homosexual is not in the Bible. That's true. Okay, but these words are. Okay, now one word up there is malakos. Do you see the first word up there? Malakos, it means soft. Okay, and it is one of those words that have to do with a sexual relationship. If you play the female role in a gay relationship, then you would be malakos. On the other hand, there's the word arsenokoitai, which is a word which means a bed partner, and usually indicates the one who plays the male in the relationship, whether it be lesbian or gay. The one who plays the male in that relationship is the second word, and the one who plays the female is the first word, and they are mentioned in a way in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 that Paul says you were some of these things. You know, you were adulterers, you were sexually immoral, you were idolaters, and you did practice homosexuality, but when you became a Christian, you stopped it. It's a pretty clear passage about what we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Because time, I've got to go quick. How many minutes I got, Steve? Okay, okay, all right, let's see. 9 minutes. All right, so 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Men who practice homosexuality, it's there for you in 1 Corinthians 6, and we just talked about it. It's also in 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 11. But we know that the law is good, but if one uses it lawfully, realizing the fact that the law is not made for the righteous person, but for those who are lawless and rebellious, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, immoral men and homosexuals and kidnappers and liars and perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to false teaching. Well, there's another place in the Bible besides Romans 1. And in Jude verses 6 and 7, and the angels who did not stay within their own positions of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of that day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued, see that phrase, unnatural desire, as Paul uses it in Romans chapter 1, serve as an example by undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Okay, so is there a gay gene? There's a lot of research here. Got to go fast. Okay, here's a gay-friendly site about gay life, and people were wondering in 2011 when the last survey was done, it was found that about 9 million people, or 3.8%, identified themselves in 2011 as LGBT. Now, right now, it's kind of fashionable, so that I expect that number would rise in 2018. But in 2011, it was 3.8%. It wasn't 10%. A lot of people say, well, there's 10% of people who are gay. This is a gay-friendly site, and it says 3.8. Of that number, about 1.8% of them are bisexuals, 1.7% are gay or lesbian. Transgender adults make up about 0.3% of the population of the United States. So one of the things that I want you to see is it's false when people say, well, 10 or 15 or 20% of people. Well, are the people who are in this area still worthwhile? And do their souls matter? Yes. But don't use a bad argument to try to go to a place that you think is a good place. So that's why that's there. You can also see that scientists trying to figure out where gayness, the same-sex attraction, comes from. And here's a guy scientist who happens to think that it arises in the womb, but there's no empirical evidence for that. Here's the guy's opinion. And then from The Guardian, which is a major site for the gay population, male sexual orientation is influenced by genes. You see the word influence there? And what does that mean? Well, we can't find a gene for it. The Telegraph is also a major gay site. Being homosexual is only partly due to a gay gene, research finds. All right, so where's the gay gene? Well, people are thinking, aha, now that we've discovered epigenetics, which is because of the ENCODE project, which is the Encyclopedia of DNA Information started by the government about 2001. Okay, they've been studying epigenetics now for about 15 years, and that would be the command center for the DNA. And having looked at that, well, there's still no gay gene. All right, so as of this day, I'm going to have to tell you there's no evidence for a gay gene. Therefore, the people who are arguing this have kind of backed away from this biological stuff because there is nothing to prove that anyone is born that way, as Madonna would say, or that anybody else is this way because they have to be that way. If that is true, it is not currently genetically known. I'm going to promise you that that is true. Okay, however, can one be gay and be a Christian? Oh, you betcha. Being gay is not the main issue. The practice of homosexuality is. And how should we minister to those in this community? With compassion and love, like Jesus would do when he was ministering to anybody. In Luke chapter 15 and verse 1, he was eating with the publicans and sinners. We are all sinners. Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23. So what are you going to do if people who are same-sex attracted come to your congregation here? You'll treat them with respect. And why is that? Because you might disagree, with their lifestyle, but what if everybody knew your lifestyle? And if everybody knew your lifestyle, and there was somebody at the door saying, I'm sorry, but you cannot come in here. Well, the elders have to make some policies about this, but from what Steve tells me about the elders and those that I've met so far, I don't believe that you would intentionally discriminate against them if they wanted to attend services here. However, if they want to get married here, or if they want to practice their homosexual relationship with each other and make it a big point, coming in here and, being very touchy-feely with each other and being distracted well, that's different. That would also be true for anybody who's disrupting the assembly. 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 40. So what we see is that we treat them with compassion. And what does that tell me? I thought that's the same thing I saw before. Oh, it's 18 after? All right. All right, so compassion has to be the rule here because remember that millennials love benevolence, and they're not going to love it if you keep somebody from coming to church just because they're same-sex attracted. We're all broken, and since we are all broken, we're broken in different ways. I'll refer you to Sally Gary, who spoke in our chapel at Freed-Hardeman. She herself is a same-sex attracted professor at ACU. Her website I would recommend to help you to find sources to read and things to help those that you love who are in this situation. I would direct you to centerpiece.net, and also I've noticed there's another website out there called equipmagazine.org, which has some very good ideas of 5 things that churches need to know about those who are gay. And remember, if it weren't for forgiveness, none of us would be able to be in a relationship with God. So what we're saying then is samesexattraction.org is a third website. I'm trying not only to give you what the Bible says, but to give you resources to help people that you know. I bet you know somebody who's gay. A former classmate of mine at Freed-Hardeman was gay. He finally died at the age of about 60 with cirrhosis of the liver, kind of drank himself to death. His partner died of AIDS back in the 1980s. He had been married to a woman with 2 children, and he left her to go off with his male lover, and he died, like I said, in the 80s with AIDS. Well, the person that he had a relationship with is the person who was a former classmate, and there were 3 of us in a room, and he was one of my roommates. And I promise you that his actions within our room were exemplary, but he had problems with same-sex attraction back in the 70s. So I love those people who have same-sex attraction. I want you to do it. I want you to understand that some of them don't even understand the condition that they're in, and they may not even know for sure where it came from. Overbearing parents, whatever the situation might be, they may not know. So what you need to do is to try to set up a situation where Compassion, not compromise. Compassion, not compromise. The sin is the practice of it. Okay, so let's go to the next one. If science has proven the Big Bang, why do Christians still believe in creation? Well, 2 years ago, I had a debate with a major atheist. I think he's ranked about number 12 in the world, Dr. Alex Rosenberg. He was former, and this was at Ohio State University, and he was former head of the philosophy department there. He still teaches in the philosophy department, so we had this debate. Okay, I don't get any money from this, but if you would like to go see the debate or read the debate with an atheist about the Big Bang Theory, etc., then I would refer you to, as in Thomas B. Warren. By the way, he's a Texas guy. All right, Thomas B. Warren, that would be warrenapologetics.org. warrenapologetics.org, and you can rent the debate or you can buy it. I want you to know that in getting ready for it, I talked to a lot of PhDs, fuddy-duddies. I talked to a lot of them. I myself have a fuddy-duddy in philosophy because I wasn't concerned about income at the time. Okay, and so as we think then about these areas, wow, okay, so we talked with a lot of very important people. So here's what I wanted to say to the atheist Rosenberg about the Big Bang. It's called the Euthyphro dilemma. If you have any philosophy at all, you know this is a writing of Plato, probably. And the problem is, which came first, good or the gods? Well, that's the problem for Dr. Rosenberg, because he's a nihilist, meaning that he doesn't believe that there is such a thing as objectivity in morals. If you don't believe there's objectivity in morals, then why are you accusing God of something? Why are you saying, God, you should have made a better world, or you did wrong when you did this? So the problem that we would have with him is, I would call this Rosenberg's own dilemma. Alex, remember that's his first name, Alex. He was a nice guy, but his half-brothers, 2 of them, died in the Holocaust from an earlier marriage of his mother. His mother never took him to synagogue. His mother did not bring him up from traditions of the Jews, and he's a very, very secular Jew. Nice guy, however. All right, so Alex, which came first, the laws of physics or the Big Bang? Now, here's the problem that you're going to have. If everything existed as in the Big Bang, then where did the laws of physics come from? How about gravity? That'd be a good one. How about strong and weak nuclear sources? Those would be good. How about electricity? That'd be good. How about magnetism? That'd be good. So here's the problem that you have. What is it that's in the Big Bang? And if it's supposed to be everything, then when it explodes, what laws of physics work on it to form it into constellations, stars, etc.? So here's a problem for you if you are a Big Bang theorist. And that is everything in the Big Bang or not? Let's assume that it was 11 to 14 billion years ago. If it was, according to Alan Guth from Harvard, then something about the size of 6 inches, big fist, about 6 inches across, is about how big everything was that exploded. So was everything in the ball? Well, no, not everything. I mean, the laws of physics were outside the ball. Okay, so are the laws of physics eternal? Well, not really. You know, that's that thermodynamic stuff out there, you know, that indicates that maybe it's not exactly eternal. So is it in the ball or is it not in the ball? And then being a cosmologist, I want to know where the ball came from. What resulted in the ball? Was it the relapse, implosion of a previous universe? Maybe it was one of the string theory things that kind of happened from the Big Bang, but how did they just organize themselves? So I wanted him to know, he never answered this, of course, were the laws of physics tied up in whatever exploded in the Big Bang? Are the laws of physics, maybe they are eternal? Do you really want to say that? And if so, what's your evidence for it? And how would you know? So here's what I said to Dr. Rosenberg, and I would say it to whatever person happens to be listening. This is Ralph's version of the deal. The universe either had a start or it did not have a start. Now let me take both of those and show you how that some scientists can look pretty strange here. I'm in favor of science. I love science. I was a math major before I was a Bible major, and that used to be called a non-empirical science. All right, so the universe either had a start or it did not. If the universe had a start, then it had to come out of nothing. So if it came out of nothing, I would like for you to demonstrate how hydrogen molecules come into existence out of nothing. I'm going to give you a vacuum, and you watch it as long as you want to. you play music to it. Top 40. Play top 40 music to it. Just watch it for a few billion years and see if hydrogen molecules just bump into existence out of nothing, like, Orville Redenbacher popcorn. Let's just see if that happens. And the answer is no, it does not happen. Why? Because from nothing comes nothing. So you don't want to take that one. All right, if you say, however, that the universe did not have a start, then there must be something in the universe that must be eternal. And what would you like that to be? Would you like it to be energy? By the way, energy needs to be produced somehow or another. Would you like it to be movement? Well, movement is the relationship of two bodies that are already moving because of energy. So I want to know, if the universe had a start, can you show me how it started from nothing? And if that Big Bang was not a start, well, then I want to know how that happened as well. How many minutes? Is that right? Okay. All right, so I want to know how many minutes that we're talking about here. So the problem that I would say to of course Dr. Rosenberg didn't want to talk about this. Why? Because he wanted to talk about the Big Bang in his book. And some of you are sorry that the Big Bang is no longer going to be on television. All right, because it is a pretty cute show at times. And I did enjoy that. But the Big Bang itself. Now, let's say then that you can't answer empirically that the universe had a start or that it did not have a start, and you have no third option. Okay, so I've got a third option. And the option is, when God said, let there be light, there was a tremendous influx of energy at that point. And it would have been like an explosion. I'm not trying to mix together the Big Bang with the Genesis account. I believe the Genesis account to be historical. I believe the Genesis account to be real. We even went to the Creation Museum and the Ark this summer, and so we enjoyed visiting those up in Kentucky. Maybe you can go see them sometime if you haven't seen them. So I believe in that. But I also know that if God said, let there be light, it's not an ordinary day. I mean, this is not like just, hey, let's grab an Egg McMuffin on the way to work. This is not an ordinary day. If God does this, there is a tremendous day in which this all came into being. I cannot imagine a way that happened without a tremendous influx of power. And you'd be looking at the space shuttle going off at maybe 1.5 million pounds of thrust per engine, and you're saying, well, that's a wind-up toy in comparison to the energy that it would take for God to do what God did. Now, the date of it would be another matter, but here we're talking about the fact of it and not the date of it. I am a young Earth theorist, but that wasn't the question, and I ain't dumb enough to go into this area right now if you didn't ask it. But the point is, this is a dilemma for Rosenberg. He's the second atheist that I have debated. About 5 years ago, Robert Price didn't believe in the historicity of Jesus, and he didn't even believe in Jesus. So we had a discussion with him about the historicity of Jesus and whether or not what Jesus said was really true. So what we're saying here, guys, is according to the Euthyphro dilemma, the universe either had a start or it did not have a start. Now, I wish I'd spend more time on the first question because I didn't know I was going to have this much extra time, but I know what to do with it. Okay, so let's see what we're going to do then. What are the big barriers for an atheist? There's three. All right, first of all, how do you explain cosmic evolution? Which is what I'm trying to ask here. How did things organize themselves? Where did the laws of physics come from? Were they all in the ball or were they outside the ball? Okay, so I want to know, number one, you see, most of us just start with Darwin back there. There's even a Darwin, Texas. Okay, so there's a place, is there not a Darwin, Texas? Well, I'm making this up then. Google it, somebody. Okay, all right, so then as I think about these 30 things, number one is, here's the first big barrier if you believe in running hurdles, and the first one is going to be, can you explain how the universe organized itself after the Big Bang? But I don't want to just start there. I still want you to explain where that stuff came from that exploded. Because I've been asking why questions since I was a boy, and you have too, some of you, since you were a girl. Okay, but nonetheless, you've been asking why questions for a long time, haven't you? When your kids were little, why? Because I said so. Okay, but anyway, you ask these questions. I want to know where the ball came from. I want to know what was inside the ball. And I want to know what organized the explosion after it explodes. Now, if there is an explosion in downtown, any Texas town you think of, is it going to tend toward order or disorder? Well, what's the answer? Disorder. Even if you have carefully planned it, you don't say, hey, we had this explosion and it created a Walmart. Well, hey, we had this explosion, it added onto the airport. Or hey, whatever. Okay, so, things come disorderly from explosions unless something begins to act on it and organize it. What is it that's acting on it and organizing? That's your first big problem if you are an atheist. By the way, if you're an atheist, you're not just saying that God doesn't exist for you. You're saying God doesn't exist. Now you're making a statement for everybody else. If you say, for me, God does not exist, I might not be so upset with you. But if you say God does not exist, period, and like Sam Harris, we're all under the spell of religion and all that business, like Letter to a Christian Nation, if that's what you believe, then all of a sudden you got my attention. And why? Because of 1 Peter 3:15. Be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks a reason for the hope that lies within you, yet do it with meekness and with fear. So the first big thing you got is this. Now what problem does you have? The next big thing that you have is biochemical evolution. Now, biochemical evolution is going to explain where the stuff came from, where life was made. I teach my students WHAMing. Water vapor, hydrogen, ammonia, methane, nitrogen, and methane. All right, so these are the biochemicals. Okay, am I an idiot to ask you the question, where did they come from? By the way, there was an absence of oxygen in the environment at that time because the little bit of linking together of amino acids that have been proven to be true in a DNA simulation device, it doesn't happen if there's free oxygen, so there was no free oxygen then. Okay, so I want to know, how did this happen? Oh, well, since 1951, we have known that life began in the laboratory. No, you have not. And why is that? Well, that would be the spark machine of Miller and Urey. And that would be Stanley Miller and his student and graduate assistant who were building this machine and trying to figure out what would happen if you could add these things together. Could you come up with the first life, which would be called abiogenesis? They've been trying to do that since 1951. Okay, quick lesson in DNA. This is not especially of mine, but Joe DeWeese is a very close friend. He's got a PhD in biochemistry from Vanderbilt University, so I think that qualifies. Number one, if you say proteins come first, what are they made of? Amino acids. So let's say then that amino acids came first. Now, there would be as many as 200 bonds, called peptide bonds, to build one average protein. And they have to be in exactly the same order each time. That would be like assigning all of you a number, the first 200 of you, and then saying, now give me your numbers up here, and then being able to pass out the numbers back to you and everybody getting the same number. Now, would you think that the lottery people would like to know how you did that? Because if you can do that, it's going to take away a lot of their business. Because you can predict those sorts of things. Can you predict how the amino acid is going to come together? No. But they have to come together to make a certain protein the same way in each time. How many proteins in your body? Well, there's 22 bioamino acids that make up thousands of proteins. But even if you have a protein, you got a problem. Because the protein is stupid. Okay, the protein does not know what to do until he is instructed what to do. So when you instruct him what to do, then he knows. Well, how does he get the message? He gets the message from the DNA, who's going to translate and transcribe it all the way through the microRNA. And then these little microRNA dudes are going to go, and they're going to go out there and tell the proteins what to do. The proteins need, supervision. They can't just do stuff. So they are supervised by the RNA, which is supervised by the DNA, and the map of that is ridiculously complex. of how that network takes place in one human cell. So, what are the odds of this biochemical evolution taking place? Was it in some big pool of chemicals out there in a primordial sea with no oxygen? And if so, what is your proof for that? Well, I got these pictures. Well, good for you. Those are called artist conceptions. What I want to know is, do you have empirical proof of that? If you ever saw the movie Expelled, you saw Richard Dawkins look like an absolute idiot. And why is that? Because he was asked this question: where did the first life come from? And he said, maybe it came from a comet or a meteor. Maybe it came from some other place. That does not help. Why? The only thing that says is, well, that biogenesis had to occur on some other planet. If it occurred on some other planet, it was brought here on the Earth Express, and then it was kind of dumped here by a meteor or a comet, it still had to happen somewhere else. And there's not enough Earth time, even if the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, there is not enough Earth time to allow that to happen. So that means today, nobody has explained abiogenesis, which is the second step. Nobody has the evidence to explain and to prove that life came from nothing. And the third area is finally we get to Darwin. And so that's called biological evolution. So we got cosmic evolution, we got biochemical evolution, and now we got biological evolution. See the word bio? That's the word. I met a lady on the plane on one of the many times we tried to get here. Okay, but I met a woman on a plane, and she was a biotechnician at St. Jude Children's Hospital. That means she takes statistics and she analyzes them and helps the professors there write articles that will help other children with cancer. And I'm thinking I was glad that I met her. That was a cool thing. Even though it was a short flight, we only went to Little Rock and then we went back. Nonetheless, I met her, and that was worth it. All right, so I want to know, okay, if life did start, were there a bunch of cells involved? Nah, one-celled organism. Okay, so how does a one-celled organism divide and divide and divide and divide and divide until it becomes a simple organism like a paramecium? How'd that happen? You know what we learned from, I saw a beautiful dog, and I didn't get too close. It was a Great Dane out here, and I'm very proud. Steve told me the story, and I'm fully supportive of it. If you want a Great Dane, you know how you get a Great Dane? You have to narrow the gene pool. Why? Because if a Great Dane has sex with a dog of another species, you no longer have a Great Dane. So to get a Great Dane, you have to narrow the gene pool of canine cells until, boom, you got this. My wife has a Maltese zoo. It's half Maltese and half zoo. Okay, and so, and it's a custom dog. He's custom in a lot of ways, isn't he, babe? He's a custom dog. He even sleeps with us now, and I swore that would never happen. Okay, but nonetheless, he sleeps with us because he's special. Well, how do you get a special dog? You narrow the gene pool. How do you get a special racehorse? You narrow the gene pool. How do you get a special animal of any kind that you desire? You narrow the gene pool, which is not as difficult as expanding it. Because expanding the gene pool is not generally seen in nature. And yet, if you want one cell to become 500 million species of animals and plants, then there's got to be some massive expansion for which there is no physical evidence. So what we see here is that I will continue to believe that. We want to have a debate with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't mind saying that on the internet. It's just that his fees are prohibitive. But we would like to have a debate with the biggest atheist that the world has to offer. Why? Because I'm tired of our kids being intimidated. They don't hear any of this stuff in high school unless they go to a Christian high school. If they go to a public school, they do not hear the other side. Even my daughter, who teaches 6th grade, said this last week in a public school, and Jackson, Tennessee, said that it was her time. What does that mean? I got 5 seconds. What? I got 5 minutes. Okay, I see 9:40 from up here. Is that 5:40? So how many minutes do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm tired of her saying, look, here's the deal. My text is teaching that humans came from apes. And I'm supposed to be teaching social sciences. So what am I supposed to do? Well, Tennessee has a protect a teacher law. I don't know if Texas does or not, which means if another student brings it up, hey, did we really come from apes? Then she has the right to respond what her belief happens to be, even if it's contrary to the textbook that is assigned to her. But the child has to bring it up. And you cannot put it into the curriculum, because if you do, you violated the separation of church and state. Is Jesus coming, or is that another signal? Okay, all right. I said that to Joyce, and she said, no, it's not a trumpet. Okay, so I'm guessing then you have a very distinct buzzer. All right, so what I'm thinking then is, here's the tragedy for the young people. They don't get to hear the other side. In the Scopes trial of 1925, there was this belief in Dayton, Tennessee, that John T. Scopes, a substitute science teacher who wasn't even sure whether he had ever taught evolution, but there had been a law passed in Tennessee. Many believe that N.B. Hardeman and his tabernacle sermons had something to do with that. But there was a law in Tennessee that teachers could not teach evolution. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the closing message to the jury was. It goes something like this. I don't have a slide for it. Judge, we've just passed a war in which there were more than 22 million dead. That would have been, of course, World War I. In hopes of allowing the new generation to make their own decisions about things like this in the future, why don't we say that he's innocent, because as a matter of fact, he should have the freedom to teach whatever the children need to hear if it is the truth. Now, that was 1925. And here we are 90 years later, and we're asking the same thing, except the coin is flipped. Why can public school kids not hear about alternate origins of the universe? Why can they not? If they're as smart as we think they are, they can tweet with one hand and text with the other. If they are as smart as we think that they are, then let them hear it and decide for themselves. But otherwise, you're giving only one side of the story. So the side of the story that I've tried to tell you is this. The evidence for the Big Bang is the evidence that there was some sort of an immediacy in the universe. We don't know when it was, and we certainly don't know what it was. But we do know from what the Bible says that God made the world in history, and he said, let there be light, and there was light. That is the only explanation that makes sense of the scientific evidence. Thank you very much.